Hello, beautiful light-filled souls. I'm so happy to share another near-death experience story with you. Today, I have Chris Kito with me, and I have a link to his full story, which was done just beautifully. I came across it on YouTube, and so I reached out to him and wanted to ask him some questions about his near-death experience. So please look at that link below. And also, I have a writing workshop coming up. This is online and in person if you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but I want to give away all my secrets to anyone who wants to write about spirituality. If you don't know, I am a creative writing professor, and so I want to incorporate actual writing tips along with my expertise of publishing traditionally and non-traditionally. So anyway, let's just begin. Chris, how are you today?
I'm well. How are you, Trisha?
Great, great. And I saw your story and it really struck me because there was this sense of you had a peanut allergy from what I realized and took a bite of a cake that ended up oddly having peanuts in it and didn't have much of a reaction until you got home. That must have been kind of terrifying to drive yourself to the ER. Was that a terrifying experience?
Absolutely. And first, I want to thank you for having me. And it's always a pleasure to speak with a fellow MDer and a leader in the community as you are. And anytime we can speak about our stories and bring some more healing out there or explain what happened. And, you never know who's listening. And we may say one or words or hear or a sentence that can really resonate with someone. So thank you so much for the work you do and for reaching out and putting all this together. It's a lot of work, and I absolutely appreciate that. So yes, to your question, it was a unique allergic reaction in the sense that it was a delayed reaction where they're going into the medical aspect of allergies. You can have an immediate reaction. And then in my case, it was slightly delayed.
Yeah, and there was something about that part of your story that really just hit me because you were taking control of this moment and that it was really kind of terrifying and sad in many ways as the death is, but then there was this afterlife experience. So just go ahead and tell me the first part of your story about when you got to the hospital, to the ER, what happened next, and I'll ask you some questions.
Absolutely. So going off that, what was it challenging or a lot of this is something that happened roughly 8.5 years ago. And I attempted to speak about this several years after. I really was not in a position to do that mentally, emotionally, even physically. I could not get the words out, or really, I was still processing the NDE. And still to this very day, I really only started speaking about it this year. With the video with Anthony came out, and there are a few other events pre-COVID, and I've done some podcasts and I've worked with some other individuals that have NDE channels. But I'm very much still in a healing integration process 8.5 years later. So this is something that's always constantly evolving and changing. Going, and even within my story, it constantly changed and evolved. I went from having a oh gosh moment, something happened, and then, oh wait, I'm okay, because there was a delayed reaction. And then from that, being alone and in the sense of, am I going to be okay? Do I need to go to the hospital? How am I going to get to the hospital? And these were all questions that were coming in. These are questions you ask yourself. You ask yourself everyday life. Except in this situation, it turned out to be a life or death situation. Do I use my EpiPens? Do I go to the hospital? Do I call an ambulance? Should I take myself there? Is this just going to subside shortly and I'll take 2 more Benadryl? And ultimately I made the decision to drive myself to the hospital. And very fortunately, one of the key moments when I get there, because a lot of it is very hazy with NDErs, but there's key moments that are absolutely vivid and unforgettable that you can always kind of relate to, and then you build out from there. I remember getting into the hospital, and I was having a very difficult time moving my hands, really. And I came up to the front desk where the nurses were, and they asked for identification. So I pulled out my wallet to hand out my license. And in that, in a wallet, you have the little slits where you keep your credit cards. I physically could not pull out my driver's license from there. And I remember kind of falling into the counter. And then at that point, they just came around, grabbed me, two nurses, and pretty much dragged me back into the hospital room. And I've never been seen medical care administered that fast. There was
Yeah.
no waiting in the Los Angeles ER room that night.
And that part of your story just reminds me that, you know, we have real trauma associated with our spiritual awakening. So there is the physical trauma and, you know, these moments that burn bright in the memory because they're unusual and they're different. And so you have that memory in that moment. So part of the processing is actually the physical stuff along with the spiritual awakening.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, from that moment on, you know, the physical, I mean, I really just felt the physical trauma just amplified. You know, I was on the hospital bed. They were cutting off my shirt. I had oxygen. I had epinephrine going in through my shoulder. And I was struggling to breathe. So I was conscious and aware of really, I was consciously aware that I was suffocating to death. And everyone's working around me. And it was tremendous pain physically in my body. You know, trying to breathe, my lungs, the hives, my throat closing, as well as I was fully conscious at this point. I knew what was happening. There was a moment getting into the NDE when I realized that I was dying. And that was another moment. And it's interesting you bring up the point of pain, because there are points in my story where I'm in excruciating pain, where it is this burning fire to breathe and fight for life. And then there's these absolute I mean, you came and put it in our discussion of time. And then the next feeling, let's use the next feeling, is this euphoric bliss and this unbelievable, I would just use euphoric bliss that I say I've never mimicked or saw again in this lifetime, or really in this world. And pain's gone. I mean, it's just gone. That does not exist. And then to go back into it. So that it's interesting you bring up the point of the pain as a physical, you know, manifestation as well, because that's sometimes left out with many NDE stories. Mine was a physical trauma.
Oh yeah, and kind of an emotional trauma too, because didn't the doctors tell you they couldn't save you and before you had your near-death experience? I remember in the interview there was something to that effect.
Yeah, yes, that was a very vivid moment. So I had the doctors working on me. I was while I was in there, I was becoming nonverbal. I had tubes, needles, everyone's working, trying me. And I was in this extreme pain. And then the pain slowly kind of went away. There wasn't much pain. And I kind of had this almost like a wave coming over. And it was this constant, it was the idea that I'm like, you know, I think I'm dying. I feel I'm dying because I was slipping away. The pain was just mellowing out. And I remember being so at peace and accepting of it. It was like, oh, well, that's it. I think I'm dying. I'm out the door, you know, in a way. And the doctor, you know, he's like, you know, we're going to try and put a tube down your throat because we can't stop the anaphylactic reaction. So, you know, backpedal a little bit. There's not a guarantee epinephrine, which is the medicine to treat anaphylactic shock, works. They hope it works. It works in most cases, but I was so far along that sometimes they can't stop it. Or they stop it, it doesn't matter, there's already been damage done because of lack of oxygen, so there's, you know, trauma to the brain, the body's in pain. So it wasn't working. They were pumping it in me, it was not working. And he looks at me and the doctor goes, I'm sorry, I can't save your life. And there was no response from me, visual response from me, but I'm thinking, all right, you know, because I was kind of out. That euphoric piece came over. I was okay. I was just, all right. I wasn't thinking in this world's energy or desire of fighting, scraping to breathe. That was what I was going through when I was getting myself to the hospital and when I was trying to get my identification out of my wallet. But then in that moment, it just went by the wayside. I was like, oh, okay, just this euphoric calm and acceptance in a way.
Yeah, that's interesting that came at that exact moment. And you were 22 at that time?
I was 20. Yeah, I just turned 23. 23 at the time.
23.
23.
Yeah, I was 22 when I had my near-death experience, and it's interesting because you're not a kid, but you haven't had a lot of adult experiences at that point, you know, and so it's this moment in life where you feel, wow, this is a short life. Am I really going to lose it, you know, in this moment? And that's an interesting feeling. But did you pop out of body? Was that, or did that feeling stay with you for a while? Just that euphoria
I did
before?
not pop out of body. Within my NDE experience in that hospital room, because then there's the post NDE, which is just as much. I would say the NDE is 5%, the after effect is 95 in many ways. But that moment, those hours in the hospital, I was within my body physically. You know, a lot of this, and you know, as an NDEer, we don't have the language for. The language just does not exist for a lot of what you feel, experience, see, understand, and are trying to integrate. So I was not looking down on my body. I was in my body. And so I was there.
Yeah, so just tell me what you experienced in the NDE, and I might have some questions for you because, yeah, language does break down. There's a lot of things we experience in the natural world that we don't have language for, and there's certainly a lot of spiritual experiences that we're still struggling to articulate in some way. But yeah, that feeling of euphoria, it was the beginning of being at peace with the idea of dying. What happened next?
In that moment, and if I pause, I'm just trying to really give the most accurate description of what happened and pulling. It's still so real, those moments 8.5 years later. I remember thinking, I'm here in the hospital by myself, dying alone, not angry, just that feeling of it's just happening. And there was no judgment. It was happening. I'm like, oh, this is it. And thinking to myself that really only kindness matters, love matters. And that was like, it's washing over me. And the idea that, you know, material things don't matter. I'm laying here on the hospital bed dying. None of it's coming with me. I'm just here. And that was like the parting energy or thoughts that were leaving. And then, you know, the real center of my NDE was I was greeted by my grandfathers, both my grandfathers.
I want to hear what they look like because that you didn't tell anything about that in the interview that I listened to. Were they their ages? Were they glowing? How did they look?
Yeah, I don't necessarily remember exactly how they looked. I just knew it was them, and in my head, they look like they look like in photos. My one grandfather passed away in the 60s, my other grandfather in the early 90s. So I was only, you know, I think 2 years old. So I didn't really have a relationship with them in this physical realm. So it just kind of hit me. And I remember them coming in and saying, well, take it easy. Like, and it was very simple. It was not, some NDErs have these huge life purposes, missions. I didn't get that. Mine was very, listen, you can't die. You got more work to do. You got to fix some relationships. And that was it. That was like, it was that, but it was as clear as I've ever been communicated to in my life. That was it. There was no it was just boom.
Did you feel like it hit you kind of internally, like at this
Absolutely.
deep soul level?
Just washed over. It was just, this is it. We're communicating on a conscious level. And that came in. And I was like, I thought to myself, oh, and I'm thinking, you know, I'm registering that, and I'm thinking, okay. And then I'm like, then at that moment, once that came in, they said, you can't die. And then I remember shifting, and I don't know if it was them shifting me or me, well, I don't know. But I remember then thinking, no, I don't want to die. That's when I snapped out of the, you know, the floating down the lazy river of, oh, I'm just passing on, to now, no, I want to live. And I want to kind of come back. And I always liken this moment, because I'm still in this unbelievably euphoric, blissful state right now, where I'm, you know, communicating with my grandfathers, and I'm having this dialogue with them. And there's this scene in the movie Saving Private Ryan where he's on the beach and they cut the noise, and there's all this chaos around him. and he just looks around. And that's where I was in that scene. I believe I'm just looking around in the room, and I'm having this internal conscious dialogue, on the edge of crossing over and on the edge of coming back. And they gave me a little push. And then I remember just taking a breath and coming back into my body. And in that moment, just feeling like I got hit with a 12 out of 10 level of pain everywhere. And this burning, scraping, fiery desire to try and breathe. And I remember that moment because I remember the doctor and the several nurses, there were like 6 or 7 people around me, were like, oh, we got something. Because I wasn't really moving. I wasn't doing anything before that. I was just there, like fading away. And now I'm back and I'm trying to breathe and I'm moving my arms and they're trying to hold me and the epinephrine's kicking down. So then my body's shaking more and they're holding my legs down because I'm shaking so much. They have me pumped up with so many chemicals. And I'm coming back and I'm trying to breathe. And I'm like, I want more air. I'm trying to breathe. I'm grabbing the oxygen around my mouth. And that was a very powerful moment because that was really, I look at now where I have the old self and then the new self with an NDE. And, I had to kind of come up with my own language, but that was like a second rebirth. That was like, oh, I'm back. And
Yes.
it's like, I'm not a little baby. I'm now, 23 years old and I'm scraping to breathe and I'm conscious of what's happening. And I'm like, really, what's going on? Oh my God, I'm covered in red welts and everyone's around me. It's frantic.
I have a question. Did you have other people who were on the other side, or were your grandfathers the only people who had died that you knew of?
I have other relatives that have passed, but it was just my 2 grandfathers that were.
Interesting. Yeah, because a lot of times I now teach kids who are in their 20s and they ask for medium readings. And a lot of times I just see grandparents because when you're young, most of the time your parents are still alive. And so.
Oh yeah. I have some great aunts and other distant relatives, but the closest to me at that time were really my grandfathers. And even now to this day, they're the most active on a spiritual level with me.
Interesting. So who were you before and after that experience? I mean, was it a big difference or, what stayed the same? What changed?
Well, it's interesting. There's a few ways I always try and look at it. And you said the idea when you had your NDE, you were 22, you are, first off, if you were just 22 and didn't have an NDE, you're entering adulthood career. At this point, I just moved to Los Angeles from New York, where I grew up. And I was starting out a career, I was starting a new life on a separate coast 3,000 miles away. And you're still developing yourself personality-wise and who you are and what you really want or what you think you want in life. And, it's tough because everyone that knew me, in a lot of cases, people around you when you have an NDE notice the immediate effect. I didn't have that necessarily because I didn't see any of my family or friends from the East Coast for 6 to 8 months afterwards, I believe. So I was in LA. So anyone that knew me for a very short period of time. I had my NDE within several months of landing in Los Angeles. So I didn't have someone say, hey, I've known you for 15, 20 years, Chris. You're very different. It was like, oh no, we met last week. I guess that's who he is. I don't know. What's his last name again? So I didn't have a lot of that. And I think with myself, I noticed there were some big differences. There were some key moments over time. It took 2 months for me even to realize what I had was an NDE. I didn't know any of that. I just remember literally walking out of the hospital. And I always joke, I knew I was really back to this world when I had to pay for parking. When you almost die, you have to pay for parking.
Oh, I know. I got a hospital bill of $150,000, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, well, I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely back.
Yeah, that's fun.
So, coming back, there were a few key moments. A few days after, I remember laying in bed, being in so much pain, just trying to breathe. And then after that subsided, and a few days later, I remember just everything reset. And fortunately, since I was 13, 14 years old, I always journaled. Just started and always continued it, even to this.
Great practice. It really helps you when you go back and look at it.
So it took a lot of time. So I was journaling tremendously during that time. And I can look back now and when the moment I realized I had an NDE. And I went back and looked this summer because I started speaking more again. I never spoke about this. People knew I had an allergy to peanuts and nuts. They knew I had an incident, if that, and there was nothing else. There was no YouTube channel videos. It wasn't Google my name and all this stuff comes up. It wasn't talked about. Up until that video with Anthony, my parents and family and friends never knew the story to an extent. I mean, my family didn't even know for 7 years or so. So
did you just didn't feel like telling them, or
yeah,
why?
it was never, I was fortunate. It wasn't a situation where I felt I couldn't discuss it. I just felt I didn't have the language. I think I was still processing. It took me several months after the NDE to realize I had an NDE, what an NDE was. And I went through the checklist they have on the website, and I had like 26 out of 27 of what is an NDE. And I was like, okay, there we go. But the key point was I remember writing back in that summer, happened in the end of April, so a few months after, 3-4 months, my consciousness has changed. And I wrote that several times over the course of a few months. And it was the same, my consciousness has changed. So even though I don't feel it came out in my writing. And that was very helpful because there were things I couldn't put together. But when I was just writing, I was realizing, then looking back and trying to integrate. I mean, it was just a hot mess for 6 months. The journal was beautiful. It's still hard to read because it pulls me right back into that summer and those 6-8 months after. I woke up every day and I really had no idea who I was, in the sense that, not that I couldn't remember, my name was Chris, I'm from New York, this is my family, but in the sense of my emotional response and mental response to situations, or how I interpreted what was around me. You have a certain behavior and you have a certain response and attitude and way and belief, and then all that shifted. And it shifted violently in matter of moments and minutes, or really seconds. And then I was left to say, okay, well, wait, they changed the whole script. My whole personality shifted. Yeah, some of it's the same, but that amount moved everything. And that was very challenging to grow up, but to be a young adult in a city, build career, dating, friends. I mean, there's so much you're realigning your values, what you want, what you don't want, what's important, what's not important, everything. And that's still something to this very day I'm dealing with. I'm walking a tightrope of what do I want in this modern world, and then versus, do I want to, I'm a businessman and I went to business school and I love it, but then there's also the part of me that's like, yeah, I could go be a hippie and live in a van at the beach. I could probably figure that out. So I have this rope I'm walking, or one or the other. So you're always kind of figuring it out. And I think that's something I'll be figuring out for a very long time.
I think so, believe it or not. A lot of near-death experiencers say they have 1 foot over there and 1 foot here. And so I think part of the grounding really is being rooted in this physical life, but also keeping those upper chakras open to guidance and to the beauty that we've been opened up to. And I always joke that a lot of people who are on spiritual paths just awaken so easily. They go to a conference and they have all this spiritual knowledge, and then one day it just happens and we're, just broken into this deeper awareness, through this death experience. But it's a blessing. I mean, there's less fear of death in most cases, and I'm sure you have that feeling as well to some degree. What I'm curious about, I have a lot of questions. Did you grow up religious? Did that inform any of it?
No, I didn't grow up religious. No, not at all. I think I went to I did go to catechism for a few years, but I've never gone to church. I'm deeply spiritual. I think, I look at spirituality as a buffet, and you go to a buffet and you eat what you like, you don't eat what you don't like. That's the same thing with religion or traditional sweat lodges or Kabbalah or astrology. Whatever resonates with an individual and brings them peace and growth, I'm all for, but I don't subscribe to any specific religion.
Were you more interested in reading about near-death experiences or about spirituality after that?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. I always grew up with a love of crystals, and I was very fortunate. My mother was a teacher for 30 years, and she also had a PhD in holistic medical philosophy. So I grew up with a lot of Doreen Virtue Angel books. I grew up with crystals. Not a lot, but enough where I had them. I remember, it's funny, you always remember, like I found a picture of my old dorm room, and there were crystals on the desk. So
It's cute.
I was in a fraternity and I had my crystals. I still have them today. And every year there's more and more show up, right? Just keep adding crystals. But I feel that it was always there, and it may have uncovered more of a spiritual path and purpose. It may have led to more understanding. And it definitely accelerated. And also being fortunate to live in Los Angeles, I had a availability of any and all spirituality, healer, intuitive, whatever it was. Some were, totally useless. Others were fantastic and brilliant and loving. But I ran the gamut. And part of, the last 8.5 years is I've dabbled in so many modes and books of healing or whatever it is, from sweat lodges, Kabbalah, crystals, Reiki. I was doing anything and everything. I just said yes. I said, I'm going to go on this path, from sound baths, energy healing, whatever that is, I am game. If I like it, great. If I don't, well, we did it. It doesn't work for me. So that's also been very helpful. And I found what really resonates for me and what doesn't. And there's different times where certain practices help more. But it has accelerated that growth. Even speaking about this really reopened up everything, and I'm still kind of, dealing with a lot of it.
Yeah, well, good for you for trying things. I always tell near-death experiencers to go to a Joe Dispenza workshop, go to a meditation, try everything, because we're very spiritually open and we do pick up things and we do learn things from other people. But we also have usually our own abilities. And you said that some of those opened up for you, mediumship. How did that happen?
Yeah, I was always highly intuitive as a child growing up. I always felt that was something. And it wasn't a conscious, it wasn't like I was 14 and I said, yeah, I'm very intuitive, I'm going to figure this out. Or it wasn't that. I just kind of made decisions, my own way. And that was the language of a 14, 15, 16-year-old in, the early 2000s. It wasn't like you just Googled or YouTubed all this stuff to find out what it was. So, information was limited then. So after the NDE, and even to this very moment, I'm very open spiritually and energetically. I can pick up on energy exceptionally well. Walking into a room, reading people, I can ground out, and I have worked with coaches to develop more of psychic ability and mediumship, which I naturally had. And then the NDE, whether it put it there or uncovered it, or it was a little bit and increased it tenfold, I don't know. But it's a skill, and it's something that I practice. I don't really read for other people. I've had a few people watch some videos and then they call and they say, can you help with this? No, I'll work with that a little bit, but I really use my intuition, and I use that as for mediumship and psychic ability, for myself, for decisions I make, and I'll do readings for my family.
And do you feel your grandfather's with you more now that you've touched them on the other side?
Yeah. Yes, there are moments where I know something will happen, or something. It's something, as you're in that world as well. When something drops in, when there's a sign or a coincidence, and it's not a coincidence. It's like, oh, that was a direct message. So I'm very aware of that, and I have moments like that, and I can kind of feel in, and if I really want, I can ground out and kind of pull in that information. So, it's really odd you bring up that point of they're always around. I don't look at, and I have the issue of my concept of time is so off, because there are moments where I think my grandparents haven't passed away, like they're still here. And I have those weird moments, and I don't want to use the word weird, but to just put it in like a language that's understandable. Again, there's some language we don't know, where I'll just be doing something and I'll be like, oh wait, I thought about my grandmother and she passed away 8-9 years ago. But yet I feel she was just here 2 minutes ago. So there's that, I feel that bridge of, someone might say that distance of someone's gone, they passed away. that doesn't exist for me. I feel like, I mean, I'm very fortunate. I feel at any moment I can just kind of pull that energy in or see what's there, or when you're open. And I don't view death as final. I think it's a changing, there's a different physical manifestation, but consciously we're all connected. And if you fine tune and you connect, you can tap into that.
Yeah, that gives us a greater peace about the dying process. What do you say to people who are afraid of death? How do you comfort them?
Yeah. Well, I think it's twofold. I think, individuals that do have a fear of death, it could be something related. And many times I've seen with past life, or there's some trauma in this life. It's not coming from I don't know if the word's correct, but a proper, a rational, point of view. And there's usually something that's off, or they need some understanding. Personally, I don't have a fear of death. I never really had one. I never thought about it. I mean, what 22-year-old does? I don't. I think it's, having experienced it, it's the most blissful, euphoric moment I've really probably had in my life, or anyone has in their life when they're in that phase. I mean, there's no language for it. And I feel it's not so much the idea of dying. I mean, pain is pain, that'll go away. I mean, I suffocated to death. There's very few ways to die worse than that, is to be consciously aware and slowly suffocate to death. So that was painful and awful. But I feel, and this is my opinion, that the fear of death is not so much the act of dying, the mechanism of dying, but what happens next. What is it? And that's really what it, and if I could give any message, or individuals ask, I say, listen, for me, I can't speak for anyone else, but my experience was love, bliss, euphoria. It was okay. And that's that in that period. That was it for me. And there's some other, if I could come up with other words, I would describe it, but there's no words that exist.
Yeah, safety and freedom at the same time was part of it for me too. Like deep love and this deep feeling that I was completely okay in that process. It was
Yeah, I
an
was
unusual
fine.
process.
There was no pain. I was well taken care of. If that could be put, that was it.
And that's a
It was very simple. It's not that complex. It was an abundance of love. Okay. There was no uncertainty. There was no fear. There was no any of those issues we deal with on a day-to-day basis in this reality in our lives were gone. We're in a different world. It's very hard to compare the two, because a lot of what we deal with does not exist there. Just does not happen.
So, did you enjoy life more in some ways after life being almost taken away from you?
Well, I think initially it was very hard. It set in. There were moments, and fortunately I journaled this because I couldn't articulate and words didn't come out. Again, I did not speak about this. This never came up. No one knew. I afterwards I remember being a little more freaked out, like, oh my God, what actually happened? After the medicine wore down, I realized I wasn't going to die. And I was like, okay, sitting there. And I was like, oh my God, what happened? This is absolutely insane. And then it started coming. And again, I had no idea what an NDE was. That didn't exist. I'd never heard that term, phrase, word, acronym, or anything. So it was like, oh my God, I'm back. Oh my God, I almost died. This freaked me out. Whoa. Now, what's unique with my NDE, all NDEs are unique, but mine, I've struggled a lot with food since then. Not the idea of like an eating disorder, but safety. And I have to be constantly aware of what's going on. I had no intention of poisoning myself with a peanut. There were peanuts in the cake. They were just there. I've never seen a peanut cake even since then. And every time I eat, I have to be aware. It's very difficult to eat out. And there were moments after that I had a lot of trouble. And even now today, I only eat at restaurants where I'm absolutely sure of. I carry my epinephrine with me. I have Benadryl in my wallet. Anyone that's with me knows I have that allergy. And it's been tough. There have been moments where I remember the first year I made pasta one time and I thought there were peanuts in it and I took it and I threw it all out. There are other times I'd buy food and I wouldn't touch anything, I'd throw it out. So I've had challenges with food because that, killed me. And that's something we eat 3 times a day, every day. So no matter what, I go out, a restaurant here, there, half the time I can't eat at the places. And it's not the idea of, oh, don't eat peanut butter. It's there's cross contaminations. It shouldn't have been there. It was there. They did something. I'm hyperallergenic, so that's enough to cause a reaction. And it's just that concern, because then you get back, because there's that, going into anyone that's had an allergic reaction, the moment that happens, your world explodes. It collapses. The impending feeling of doom. And I automatically go back to, oh, okay, this is when I suffocated to death. So it's very hard for me to eat out. Traveling is difficult. I love to travel, but for example, when I'm in airports, I only eat. I never touch food on an airplane. That's like the biggest fear ever. If I had an allergic reaction in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, I'm done. Fast food is safe. I don't like eating fast food. I eat as clean as possible. But if I'm in a pinch, I know fast food is safe because there's no peanuts or nuts there. And it's all the same. It's all processed. It's all, like that. So there's challenges to having my specific allergy that I relive constantly.
I hear you. And, I was thinking of other near-death experiencers I've interviewed, and then myself, I have PTSD in cars because of my car wreck. But food is just as important, if not more so important. There are times I didn't drive, but we always eat, like that's just a part of our lives. So that's interesting. Also, a spiritual sensitivity. A lot of people after near-death experiences do have more sensitivity to food. They might eat a more vegan diet, or they might just be more aware of how food is processed in this world. And so there's just greater awareness, I guess, that comes with a spiritual awakening.
Absolutely. I think it's with everything from the quality of water you drink. I'm a big proponent of healthy, clean food, sustainable food, water as well, the environment, all that, manifests. I mean, I think everyone has some level of that consciousness. And then an NDE, again, either uncovers it or it just shoots it up 100 times. I'm very, I don't want to use the word particular, but I'm very sensitive again to any smells. Obviously, certain foods I can't eat, even foods I may not have an anaphylactic reaction, they may just upset my stomach. I avoid a lot of breads and gluten. Even light sensitivity or loud music or angry music, not a fan. I'm never really a fan. Post NDE, there were some physical changes. I'm not in the sun as much. I have a much more sensitivity to sun. Loud music is something as well. Any sort of smells or colognes, perfumes, or exhaust is a much heightened response. People may not like it, but for me, it's much more significant.
Yeah, I traveled through India, if you can imagine, the sights and the sounds, and there was painting and construction, and I was hit with this wave of smells, and I walked into a healer's place, and she made me lay down on the floor, gave me something cool for my forehead, said a prayer, and all of that reaction just went away. Like she shifted it in a single moment in the middle of this disgusting, construction area. It was really interesting how that happened, and in a single moment. So I understand that desire to be involved in spirituality and to learn more. What do you think value wise has changed the most for you? I know it's hard to say at 22 and now, but is there any value system that has changed?
Well, I'll say this. I feel if I was given $1 billion, I'd give 950 of it away.
Yeah.
Over the course of my lifetime. That's the best answer I can give.
Oh, I love that. And that's kind of how I feel too. Like there's nothing wrong with liking luxury and beautiful things, but I worry about human trafficking. I worry about, children starving. I worry about all kind of things, abuse and people living, on the edge. And it hit me about, when was it? 10 years ago. I was like, I can either go into the store and buy some designer jeans, or I can save a human life in India with this donation. I was like, so I did it.
And to add on to that question, I don't necessarily enjoy speaking about my NDE. I'm sweating right now. My hands are I'm white. My underneath my white knuckling right now.
Oh no!
And it's still very difficult. But I made the decision where I spoke once and someone came up to me and said, you know, I lost my daughter and what you said has really helped me. And I said, you know what? I should have never walked out of that hospital. They even told me that. They said, you should have been dead. I know there wasn't much bedside manner, but it's okay. I'm from New York. So I was like, thank you for being honest.
You were out like 20 minutes, weren't you? Like you should have had brain damage.
I was in the hospital for close to 8 hours.
Wow.
So I said, you know what? I walked out of there where I should have been dead. I had no brain damage. I walked out in many ways in the following months better and healthier than I ever was, mentally, physically, spiritually. And there was a young woman a few months after I had my NDE reaction. I saw that she had one and she did not make it out. She went into a coma, which I easily could have, it could have gone either way. And then she was in a vegetative state, I believe still to this day, if she has not passed, and she was about a year older than me. So I always had, you know, the what if was this young woman I heard of, and I followed her story of had the same thing. She had a piece of peanut and a piece of ice cream, and it wasn't supposed to be there. And the same thing, same story, just swapped cake for ice cream. And I walked out, she didn't. She's on a breathing tube now still to this day, if she has not passed away. So I said, you know what? I don't know what my, you know, I always get this question, well, like, what was your mission? What's this? I said, I don't know, but I'm going to just do the best I can for myself and those around me. And if I can help anyone by sharing my story, even though I don't necessarily enjoy speaking, it's not, I'm getting better. It's, you know, it's really, it's raw, it's authentic. You know, that's very rewarding for me. And if I can lend a hand that way, it's such a niche. You know, I met with, I'm sure you have as well, a lot of parents that have lost children through disease or car accidents, or, you know, someone that's had some crippling fear, and they say, hey, and you know, I'm very fortunate, you know, I've done other speaking engagements in the video with Anthony, and I've had people reach out from all over the world. Every week I get random texts, phone calls, emails from someone saying, are you the real Chris? Yeah, it's only one of me. And I respond, and I respond to everyone. And I've heard some of the most heartbreaking stories of grief and loss. And then I hear some of the most, you know, and then that's turned into the most beautiful, amazing. And then you wake up and you go, oh my God, like, this is so precious. So that's what I give back. I focus on that. And that's my goal, is if I can help one person, it's worth it. And that's why I thank you so much for reaching out. And I love to engage and talk, and it's tough, it's difficult, but I'm doing it, and I push myself in the idea of service to help those, because everyone, it's so niche what we talk about. It's so raw, it's so personal, it's so deep, and it's so heavy that there's not many people that can relate. You know, I've had some people call me and say, hey, you know, I had a woman reach out and say, my daughter died and I don't know who to speak to. She's like, she died. She got in her car, said goodbye. And then the next call I got was the fireman to look at her body. And she's like, I thought about talking to you because that would, you know, I said, okay. I said, sure, I'll listen. I'll be here. And there's no judgment with any NDE. Like there's zero. And they have questions they may not, you know, people may not feel comfortable asking some people that are not in this community. You know, there may be some embarrassment, or, you know, they talk about spirits or psychics or mediums or afterlife, and they don't want to bring that up because they don't, you know, they don't want to be judged or laughed at. And especially in a moment where they're dealing with an unbelievable amount of grief, whether it's a lost loved one or a child, it's very hard for a lot of people. So I find a lot, and what really motivates me and why I do this is to give back in that way. And that's like, I kind of made a deal. I said with my grandpa, I said, listen, you got me through it. This is what I'll push back at. I said, I'm not just going to leave. I said, I'll do this. And it's been very enjoyable. And it's also done a lot for me to help me grow and really still integrate this experience and myself and grow up through it.
And, you know, on that note, I do have to say that is the biggest joy in giving back. You know, I have 80 videos or more up now and 1 million views on this channel. And I have so many notes from people around the world, people who have been on the street and have seen a video that changed their life. People who, you know, like you said, have suffered enormous loss, lost most everyone in their family. And so they're more connected to that other side than here. and the stories just pour in. I honestly can't even keep up with my emails at this point because I have a full-time job and the emails are just overwhelming me. So I don't get back to some people, and I feel really bad about that because I have to attend to my students first before I can attend to this platform. So yeah, if you're watching, I'm thinking about hiring an assistant to actually help me with emails, just so that I'm doing reading, so I can hire someone at this point to just handle emails, because I really do want to respond to people, and I want them to know that that is the biggest joy, to know that someone was hurting. They saw you speak about your experience. Maybe they lost someone in a similar way or lost someone at that age, and they're connected to your story and it helps them in some way. That's beautiful. I mean, that is giving back in a major way. And to be honest, some people are pretty addicted to near-death experiences. They'll tell me that they watch a lot of them.
Yeah. And it's interesting off that. I really, you bring up that point. I've never actually watched the video I did with Anthony. I don't rewatch a lot of what I say and do. I also don't follow a lot of NDE stories. It's still just a little too difficult. So,
Yeah.
and I'd be honest, because, so many NDE stories have that Oprah moment of, oh my God, it's perfect. It really wasn't. It was very difficult. I was alone. After dealing with the intense physical pain, there was the mental, emotional, picking up the pieces, putting it back together. And still, I'm talking 8.5 years later, I'm still dealing with this, and I can't sit through that video that Anthony did, or it'd be very hard for me even to watch this. Maybe not so much because I don't go into the details, but I relive that, and it's not all beautiful and sparkly and unicorns. It can be traumatic and violent and scary and very difficult to process. For 7 years, I never spoke about it. It did not come up. There were people that asked, and I just said, we don't talk about it. And that was like, it was stopped. I took the air out of the room. And, it's tough. And I try and, I'm speaking now about it. And if I can lend something else to those that are out there, if you're in a situation where you've had this experience or you're in it, and a lot of NDE stories from what I've seen and gone to the conference many years, it is all wonderful and great. And there are times I'm sitting there, I'm like, well, I didn't have that. I mean, yeah, I'm beyond grateful and blessed and fortunate, and I feel all those things. But yeah, it was awful. Like, there were some terrible moments, and there were some times where I didn't speak about it for 7 years, and I couldn't get the words out. And that's very hard, for a lot of people, because they see these things where it's all amazing and it's wonderful. Some of it is, and there's also the other side that isn't. And I want to kind of keep it as authentic from, my story, as authentic as possible.
Yeah, and to those who haven't seen that video, I did watch that one with Anthony, and it's very well done. And you did a great job of telling your story just straight through. So there were some details we didn't get into in this interview. So for people who want to check that out, I will have the link below. But thank you, Chris, for sharing your knowledge and your journey, because it definitely will touch people. And that's what I believe. All these podcasters and YouTubers out there who are interviewing near-death experiencers, you never know who's going to see this in Ireland or New Zealand or where in the world someone is going to be watching it on their phone on a train, or just waiting at the doctor's office, and they'll see this and they'll feel better. So you never know.
And there's something else I was thinking about in preparation for this. I was thinking, I saw you speak, Tricia, several years ago. I think it was in Seattle. Were you in Seattle?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. The Bellevue INs. Were you at that one?
I was there. And I remember, and as we just discussed, those little things, I remember you speaking, and I don't, forgive me, I don't remember a lot of it, but I remember one thing, and I to this day still keep what you said. And you said you meet people at their level when you speak to them. And that's something I've incorporated in business, my personal life, and even when I do any work with NDE. And it's the idea that it's the ability to connect with someone and reach them at their level, whether they're a 5, 55, or 25, and really resonate and blend with someone. And I thought, again, I totally forgot I saw you speak then. This is 3 years later, and now we're interviewing each other. And I don't remember what you talked about, but I remember you saying that. And again, that stayed with me. So I know the power of when someone says something. And so I want to say thank you, because I don't remember what you talked about, but I remember you said that line. You said you meet people. And I said, oh my God, that is brilliant.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And I met my grandfather over there too. So since, we were both 22 when we had our experiences, you're quite a bit younger than me, but still when you're 22, those grandparents are there like waiting for you. I see this in people. I see it in so many young people, and our grandparents love us so much and get so little time with us. They often act as our guides on that other side, and it's really kind of wonderful. But yeah, well, I'm glad you're out there telling your story more and getting more involved with IANDS and other places. And thanks for chatting with me. Really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you so much, Trisha. Thank you for having me.
Yes. And for everyone, links are below in this video, both to my writing workshop. I love helping people tell their stories of spiritual experiences. Does not have to be a near-death experience, but I think awakening is spreading across this planet through videos, podcasts, books, and much more. But thank you, and may you be blessed.